now that you have your images black and white, let's talk about how we can add color non-destructively. Some of the goals from this practice will be to get familiar with the color picker, the paintbrush, adjusting the size of that, zooming in and navigating on your image, as well as adding layers, renaming your layers, and changing layer opacity to be able to create a blend. Let's just look over here at a finished example of this project. So you can see I have the original layer on the background, and that's in black and white, and then we have multiple layers that have the different parts that have been added in with color. And if you look at these layers as I click through and you go up here where you can see the opacity, you can see that they're all at different levels of opacity. And that's what we're doing here. We're using opacity to be able to create a blend. I'll just switch this up to 100% opacity and you can see the way that looks. So that's a little bit too intense. I'm going to switch that back down to, I think it was around something like that. Okay, and renaming our layers is another one of the goals. All right, so let's get started. Let's see, I'll start with the cat here. Let's talk about adding some layers. So over here in the layers panel, if you go down to the bottom, there's a plus sign, and you can use that to add a layer. Let's add a couple of different layers here. I'll get started with 3 of them. Then to work on a specific layer, I'm going to select that one. So I'm clicking onto layer 1 here in the layers panel. And I'm going to start with coloring, adding a little bit of color into the cat's eyes. So I need to adjust the color. I come over to my tool panel, and down at the bottom I have my color pickers. And I'm going to double click on the top box. This is for my foreground color. Actually, sorry, that's a single click. And this gives me my color picker. The color picker has a slider here in the middle, and you slide this around until you get the kind of hues that you want. So I'm going to go for some greens. I'll go something around in that area. And I can click around, and if I look over here, it tells me what's the current color I have for my foreground and what's the new color, the color I just selected. This can be useful, let's say, if I picked this green and now I started to paint in, and then I decided, no, I want something a little bit yellower. So if I go up here, I click on that again, and I maybe move my green out. So now it gives me that comparison. So that's why this looking over here at the new and the current can always be very useful. But I'll cancel that out. And because I want to get rid of this, what I started, I'm going to open up my history panel, and I can just go back a step. Oh, a couple of steps until I get rid of that. Okay, so the history panel, very, very useful. You're definitely going to want to work with your history panel in this project. All right, so the next thing I want to point out would be the brushes. So about halfway in your toolbar, you have the brushes. And the brushes work with the option bar up here. You can select it's about like the third icon over, and click on it. And here you can adjust the size of your brush. But I'm going to really encourage you to use the left and right square bracket keys on your keyboard. Just take a second and look at those. They're on the right side of your keyboard under the backspace. Left and right square bracket keys will allow you to increase the right one, increase the size of your brush, and the left one, decrease it. I find it a lot faster and better than going up here to have to adjust my brush size. But you can also explore all the different kinds of brushes. We have brushes with soft edges or harder, and there are just a lot of different types of brushes. And if you take digital imaging too, you'll learn how to make your own brushes even. So once you have picked a brush, maybe I'll take the soft round brush. Notice how I'm clicking outside of my image so I don't inadvertently paint. So now I'll go through the history panel and get rid of that. So if I want to get rid of this and I want to shrink that up, I just clicking into the gray space outside. Okay, so now I've picked my color, I've picked my brush. I'm going to use the left and right square bracket keys to adjust the size. To do any painting, I want to be really zoomed in so I can see the edges. So I'm going to take my magnifying lens here, and I'm going to zoom in. And remember, we can go up to the options bar and we can change this between a zoom in and a zoom out. I can also kind of drag and make a selection over the area. Oh, I can really see this cat's eye. But this is how you're going to have to work for this project. I could, if I have a mouse, I can kind of scroll to see different parts of my image. Sorry, the wheel I meant to say. You could take the hand tool, which is also the space bar. Not sure why that just shrunk my image out. and you can also use the hand tool to drag things around. Okay, so now I have, oh, zoom in even a little bit more. Yeah, there's that eye. So I'm going to paint. So I take my paintbrush, making it kind of small, and I like to typically make an outline first. I'm going to just kind of do this quickly so that it doesn't take up too much of the video time. So I'm just going around. I like to make an outline first, then I might make the brush even larger and then kind of fill it in. And I'm just keeping my fingers on those left and right square bracket keys as I'm going, so that way I can make it larger if I want to fill in an area, and then smaller. All right, so let's say I make a mistake and I go too far. I cut into a different part, oops, I go like that. I can go through the history panel to undo that. But you also could use the eraser tool right here. And I can use those left and right square bracket keys to make this larger. So you can use the eraser tool to kind of touch things up as well. I'm going to now zoom out. So that looks a little startling. It's kind of a bit too artificial. So what I would do next is go over to my layers panel and lower the opacity down of that. So it's just kind of a blending effect. Yeah, I've just added a little bit of color. So what I would do is then go and add color to the second eye, and then I would like you to rename your layers. So I would just double click where it says layer 1. It's kind of a slow click, don't fast click, and then I can rename it eyes. So now I want to point out how you would work with the layers in the example where you have made the original image black and white through an adjustment layer. So I'm going to add 3 new layers, just like I did before. The new layers come in above whatever layer I was selected on. So I was selected on my original layer, layer 1, and when I added the new layers, it came in above. But here's the problem. So let's say I want to start painting my flower. I'm going to select one of my layers. Make sure you are not painting on your original layer. You always have to make sure you select one of those. And now I try to paint. It's coming out grayscale because it's being affected by my adjustment layer above it. So in the adjustment layer example, you need to make sure that that adjustment layer, I'm just clicking it and dragging and letting go when I see the blue bar right above my original. So this adjustment layer is only above the original. So everything above it is not being affected by this. Photoshop sees things from the top down. So now I could continue, I could go painting here. One other thing I wanted to point out, so I would like you to paint over different parts of your image, and then you're going over to the layers panel and adjusting the opacity to blend it in. And you can do some retouching with the eraser tool, but mostly what I want you to practice, I want you to practice working really zoomed in, using that handbar to kind of navigate, move things around, painting, adjusting the size of the diameter of your brush, making it smaller or larger, making some adjustments with the opacity, picking different colors. And I wanted to point out that you also can adjust the opacity of the paintbrush itself as you're painting. So right now, if I just paint, this is coming out at 100%, and what I was doing was lowering the opacity over here. That's fine. But I wanted to point out you could also paint in. If you go up to the options bar when you have your brush selected, I could choose to start off with painting in only at, let's say, 50%. I'll just make my brush really large just so you can get a sense of what I'm seeing, what I'm creating here. And so this is the way it looks painting in at 50% versus 100%. And then I could still continue to blend that more by adjusting the opacity of my layer over here in the layers panel. So just to point out, there are 2 different ways you can adjust the opacity. It's of the original, over here in your options bar, this affects the way the paint comes out, and this affects the way we see the layer. I think this method is a little bit better because we can always make adjustments. I can always decide if I want to bring it back to 100% or not. Now for your assignment, I would like you to have multiple layers, try to get in details. I would like you to have different opacity levels for each one of your layers. So kind of go through each one and decide when does it look good, you know, what's the level of opacity that you should have. And I would like you to rename your layers. Again, I'm looking at one layer. You've either found a black and white image or you made it black and white through the image mode. Sorry, not one layer, but one image. And the other one, you are doing it through an adjustment. Okay, so check that out if you missed that. In the next video, I'll talk about how to save them.